Well, I think when Prentiss and I started, we first began working on weekends, and basically we were slave labor because we had a layout at our original facility, which was very cumbersome, in which if you had sheet metal, which we would form ourselves, the sheet metal shop was upstairs. The material was delivered downstairs, so you had to take these sheets of metal and take it up 32 stairs to where the metalworking equipment was. And of course, nobody wanted to do that job. That's a thankless job.
Hey there, and welcome to Under the Roof, the official podcast of Baker Roofing Company. I'm Todd Kavanaugh.
And I'm Matt Elban, and we're here to connect the dots between field and office, leadership and crew, values and action.
In each episode, we dive into the stories, lessons, and updates that matter to our team.
From safety and career growth to company milestones and good old-fashioned storytelling, it's all about living out what makes Baker, Baker. Let's get into it. Welcome back to Under the Roof. If you'll notice, we're doing something a little bit different today. We felt like the conversation warranted it, and so did our guests. So we're meeting in person live, and we're excited to have you guys.
So today we are here with Prentiss Baker and Frank Baker, grandsons of our founder, W.P. Baker I, and former owners of the company. We're here just to learn a little bit about the history of Baker, probably some of the stories that none of us have really heard. We mined the Always Good Work book, so we pulled some fun ones out that hopefully that maybe look back several decades. So we're excited to get into it today.
So one of the questions that I always like to ask up front is, what's the most recent book you've read, and what'd you learn from it? We'll start with you, Frank.
Well, probably the most recent book I've read was a novel by Colson Whitehead, who was a great Black writer, has won the National Book Award twice. I just think it made me understand somehow our relationship to the community and what part of the community helped found our company.
Very cool. I keep a list of all the books that people have recommended, and I've been going through them slowly. So I'll have to add that one to my list. Appreciate it. Prentiss, how about you?
Interesting. My daughter Kelly, Alex's mom, has written a book. I think it's A Hole in the Soul, I think is the name of it. And it's a life experience book. And just to give you a little more insight, it's about her experiences with birth, abortion, and she's very pro-life activist. So anyway.
Great. I'll add that one to the list as well. Appreciate it.
It's a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think one of the first questions that we wanted to ask and get into, we hear a lot about William Prentiss I. And I'm trying to, as we were thinking through some of these questions, what would be one of the first things, if I were to walk into a room, what would be one of the first things I'd notice when I meet him, whether shaking his hand or talking to him and thinking about Mr. Baker I?
Short, small man, always dressed impeccably. That sounds kind of strange being in the roofing business, but at the stage when I knew him, he was older and probably didn't get on many roofs, quite frankly, at that point. He had worked with his hands, particularly in the sheet metal shop, for a big part of his career. Soft-spoken. You want to add anything else to? Well, I think the part that he was impeccably dressed is quite important because he came from a very, very poor background. He left Carteret County when he was 13 years old, I believe. Well, 13, yeah. Put everything he owned on a mule and came to Raleigh. So he was alone. No education. Absolutely not. Never did. Tenant farmer. That was his dad had. And the kids, when they got to a certain age, 12 or 13, they would send them off to the big city, Raleigh, to work and be able to send money back home for the other 8 or 10 siblings in the family to live. Obviously didn't make much money being a tenant farmer. But as he aged and became engaged with Baker Roofing Company, or Rawls Tin Shop as it began, I think he always wanted to show that he was a businessman and a gentleman, no matter what his background had been. And the way that he showed that to the public was the way that he dressed. So it was very important for him to be viewed by his peers as a gentleman.
Yeah, when I picture your grandfather, I think of that one photo. There's a woman at the desk with the typewriter and him standing behind, impeccably dressed in a suit. And I heard actually specifically, like, you're known for your dress. And I've heard, like, that's where you got your inspiration. You too, Ms. Baker, but I've heard, like, the suits, and that is part of where you got that inspiration in your life. Is that true?
I think that's essentially accurate. Yes. He passed along I know he did to my dad. Because my dad, he was not as good a businessman, to be honest, as our grandfather was. But he was a great gentleman, and that was one of the many things that he taught us was how to treat people, how to act. So that was very important to him and to his grandfather. Now, with that, granddad dressing impeccably, he was a very humble man. Was very evident and had a big impact on us.
So we talked quite a bit about your grandfather, and I guess a question we were wondering was, tell us a little about your grandmother. What was she like?
She's a good grandma. She would let granddad be the man of the house. She was understated, I would say, and good lady. She was self-effacing, very quiet. I think historically that was what you would have expected a woman of that time to be like. She put herself second to her husband, went about her life quite quiet.
I imagine to support a owner of a business, she had to be pretty strong too.
Oh, yes. I think as different roles, as the ages roll by, different generations. But Dad was the only child. She was stay at home, and she was raised with nothing too. So they lived simple lives.
So we'll change gears a little bit. And I think, Frank, you've told me stories. I've heard it. I've been here 23 years. This might have been his story from 13 years ago of what your summers were like starting at the roofing company. I'm not sure if it was Baker Rawls or at the time. And there was obviously no air conditioning, and you were toting slate up and down stairs. I feel like I remember you telling a story a little bit about maybe some guys playing cards outside where you were going up and down the steps. Tell us a little bit about what those early years were like working in the summer at the company. Bring us back, because it looks a little different now, I think, in some regards.
Well, I think when Prentiss and I started, we first began working on weekends, and basically we were slave labor, because we had a layout at our original facility, which was very cumbersome, in which if you had sheet metal, which we would form ourselves, the sheet metal shop was upstairs, the material was delivered downstairs, so you had to take these sheets of metal and take it up 32 stairs to where the metalworking equipment was. And of course, nobody wanted to do that job. That's a thankless job. So we, Saturday, Dad would have us come down, and that's how we started our work life. We were hoofing stuff up and down the stairs. After that, I think finally we get old enough, and we were legally able to work for a roofing company, so we actually got paid.
So you didn't get paid in the beginning?
Oh, no. No. That was like I said, we got paid in trade. Granddad would go buy us clothes downtown, so we get paid, yeah. Never had a check with our name. Now, my experience is a little bit different. I remember bringing metal up the steps, but I remember pushing a broom a lot. The old sheet metal shop was upstairs, and it was, at that time, it was a 100-year-old building, and it was wood frame, just what you expect. If you went and looked at the place, you can picture old wood floors, a big furnace heater out in the middle of the room. It's a big room, probably 75 by 100 foot long, 125 foot. And it was, you've seen pictures of it. And we've got pictures of that old shop. So we had several 3 sheet metal tables that you would, very similar to what our new shop is, you'd have a table to place your metal on. And if you were custom making something, of course, you were doing the work right there. If you were forming metal, you would prick it, mark it, then put it in the brake. And it was always a two-man job, one on each side of the brake. There were some hard lessons. And I remember one of my first real jobs when I was getting paid, I was a helper. I was Jake's helper. Jake was the shop foreman. Now, that's a big title. Jake worked by himself a lot of times. So I think they were trying to find me something to do. And Jake was very efficient in doing stuff by himself. So he would, I'm sure Granddad had told him, said, find something, Prentiss, let him try to learn what's going on. I had some funny experiences doing that. And I'll never forget this. He was trying to put a piece of metal, heavy metal together, and we were using old-fashioned rivets, the ones you had to pound to close them up tight and secure. And so he had a good idea. He said he was going to hold the metal. The rivet was in place. I had to hammer the rivet. Well, guess what? I missed the rivet and I hit his hand, and it was not a pretty sight. I got better after that, but he didn't let me do that chore, that task any longer. Yeah.
Frank, you said something a second ago, had me thinking how many steps you probably did, because you said 32, meaning you remember the number.
Yeah, it's funny that
I would have been counting those in my head. I was going 1, 2 until I was done every time. I'm sure.
It was straight up. It was a lot of steps, and ceilings were high back then, so probably the ceiling was probably 20, 25 foot. That first floor was the same way. You had to go up the steps, and that was the job, carrying that metal up. It helped us become men.
I guess my next question is, when did you guys decide to move the sheet metal shop downstairs?
When we moved to Berkeley Streets.
We're not doing that one again.
Yeah. You have to understand, I would remember the 32 steps because there's a fair amount of OCD in our family. So you would go up those stairs and, over and over, you would count 1 through 32. So you go, 55, 60 years later, I still remember that. The story I think you were referring to, Todd, was when I finally had a job in the summer and they would send me out to work. And I was never talented enough to actually put material in flats. So all I did was tote. I took stuff and, we don't have all these mechanical lifts at that time like you have now. You put this stuff on your shoulder, carried it up a ladder to people who were talented enough to actually install slate or shingles or whatever type roof you were working on.
You were the mechanical lift.
I remember I was working, and one summer we were putting the roof on a new dormitory at St. Mary's College. And I was doing my duty, I was loading that stuff up, take it up to the ladder, and this was slate. And we'd take it to the 2 mechanics we had who were actually talented enough to put the material in place, and did this for hours every day. It's all I did. And at one point, I took it up the ladder, went back over the ladder to go back down and get some more material, and I fell off the roof. And I fell, luckily, because it was a 3-story building, I fell into a pile of masonry sand that has just been delivered, rather than hitting the hard ground. So, and I was so embarrassed that this had happened. It was so young that it didn't really physically hurt me at that particular second in time. So I got back on the ladder and got back up it as quickly as I could to try and make it sound like nothing had happened. They were all sitting there laughing as I came up the ladder. And I never did get really good enough to put all that material in place. I was always just sort of a toter. Yeah.
Prentiss, there's actually a story in the book about you and Dorothea Dix. And I'm not sure if you know where I'm going with this one. Tell us a little bit about that story.
Dorothea Dix, for many, many years, was a mental hospital for the state of North Carolina. And a lot of those buildings are still standing. There's some been torn down, and they had different levels of mental health issues, depending on what your level was, which building you went to. So they had criminally, well, it did not happen on the name of the building, but we knew what it was, criminally insane. So there was a lot of security These guys had committed crimes, usually murder. Not exaggerating that. So we get a work order from Dorothy Dix. Now, we're at Dorothy Dix in Old Davie Street, not but about a mile from the whole garage blueprint downtown. It was very small. In fact, it was somewhat country between Davie Street and Dorothy Dix. So
Really?
Anyway, we get this call, and at the time we did blowpipe work, heater work. That's what they needed. I've got a Baker uniform on. That's a brown tan work uniform. And I'm dressed just like Jake is. So they get us in. You have to get clearance, and you get in, and you have to walk to the job site, which is inside the building, maybe a couple hundred feet. The crazies were acting crazy. Some of them would lean against the walls. We're in the hallways walking, some laying down, sitting against the wall. And one of them said, I remember just like it was yesterday, we got a new one coming. I kept walking, didn't say a word. It's like you Silence of the Lambs.
So for clarity of the story's sake, they thought Prentiss was joining them.
I was. Yeah.
And clearly you didn't. You're back here with us, and they didn't hold on to you.
Feels good. I have to tell you, just add real quick, 30-second story. So we got another call one day from Meredith College this summertime, and they had bought a new organ in the music department. And our job was Jake made the duct that you were hooking up the organ to the airflow, I reckon, whatever, that's exactly how it works. But anyway, our job was to install this duct, and it had to be airproof. And this is not when Jake was not a perfectionist. And I sure wasn't. Let's put it this way. We finally got it airproof, but it took us 2 or 3 days.
So was it one of these, they'd hit the organ and it'd be like whistling?
The right sound did not come out of that organ. So, yeah.
So I guess eventually you just had to get out of the duct work. Yes. Speaking of old work, I'm curious. I know some of the lore of Baker is around moonshine stills. I'm not sure I think the statute of limitations has run out at this point, so we can talk about it. I would love to hear a little history about moonshine stills and Baker Roofing Company.
Well, we did specialty copper work. After I had worked at the company, I guess finally I was full-time at the company. So it had been 1969, 1970. We were working on Saturday. We always worked on Saturday. We worked every day except Sunday. And I'm at the back counter doing some little anybody could have done, but I'm sitting there and this guy walks in the back door, and he's smoking a cigar. He's got on a hat and a tie. And, I thought, well, this is a little odd for a Saturday in the summer. But he comes in and he's got a drawing with him. And he says, I need you to make this for me. And I need it on Monday morning. And I'll pay cash, whatever it is you feel like you need to charge me to do this work. It was this sort of round thing made out of copper, and it had some pipes coming out of it. And I didn't have any idea what it was. So I took it out to Jake. Jake looked at it and started laughing, and he said, you don't know what this is, do you? And I said, no, I don't. He said, well, this is a moonshine still. And that guy's a moonshiner, and he's going to come back in here Monday morning, and he's going to have a stack of bills with him to chuck a horse. And whatever we want to charge him, he'll pay us just to get up and going. And that's exactly what happened. He made that thing that day, came in Sunday, finished it up. Guy comes back in Monday, still wearing the tie, the hat, has the cigar, walks in, says, what do you need me to pay you? And I can't remember what I told him, but it was something outlandish, of course. And he just starts rolling bills, puts it on the counter, says, can I take it away now? I said, yes, sir. Down he goes.
I always wanted to know if that was Percy Flowers or Percy's brother. He was a famous bootlegger from Johnston County. I'm famous. There's a book just came out. If you hadn't read it, it's not a great book, but it's kind of a life story of Percy and his brother and the family. Flowers development down there on 42. The daughter is
Quite a legitimate
taking
fence.
those 3,000 acres that they all turned into advisory zone.
Yeah, that's questionable.
Yeah.
Talk about some of the stuff that you guys did as you were growing up and toting and those things. But I've always been kind of curious, maybe what was the dumbest thing you two ever argued about at work?
I'm going to start this conversation. I cannot answer the dumbest thing we argued about. We did argue, though. That was the whole point. We did not see eyeball to eyeball a lot of times. And I think me being the oldest, I kind of assumed that I needed to be the boss. Bless his soul. Let's put it this way. We show our love to each other a whole lot better now than we did back then. Why would you answer the question? What's the dumbest?
And you know what? It doesn't have to be dumbest either, but it could be like, what is one of those things you remember like, oh yeah, we did not see eye to eye for a while on this thing.
We disagreed about so many things. It's hard to say specifically. There was one that was more outlandish than the next. We did argue quite a bit. I never did quite take to the idea that because I was younger, I should be subservient. We tended to clash quite often.
Was that your problem?
And, we were quite vocal about it. I remember years after this, because this, like the first 3 or 4 years that we worked together, that was when the apex of the disagreements came to the fore.
Did it ever turn into a thing where like other employees were like, uh-oh, the Baker brothers are going at it, and everybody just kind of gave you space and walked away? And
I'm not sure we was cognizant of what was going on around.
I think that happened more than once. Yes.
There was a point where you took over fairly early for your dad, so there wasn't really a ringleader. Y'all just had to kind of...
We didn't have, Dad wasn't down there. I mean, for a long time, he had that second heart attack, so he was out of work a long time. And when he came back, he didn't want to be the boss, which was great for us. Quite frankly, gave us that opportunity. And even he set his office up downstairs. We took one of those old rooms and went in there and put sheetrock in there. So he was estimating. So Dad, if he showed up, he didn't come to the office every day. He'd show up in that office down there. So again, we just had a wonderful opportunity to take it and run. And sometimes we would stumble, and then we would run a little bit, and then we'd walk and stumble again. But it was a great experience. I wouldn't trade a day of my life, quite frankly, of all the tough things that have happened, but all the wonderful things that have happened, the blessings that we've had.
All right. Well, we are going to pause right here. And I'll be honest, we had not originally planned on splitting this into 2 parts. But this conversation with Prentiss and Frank has been way too good to cut it down. There is too much in here worth hearing. So rather than edit out the good stuff, we're going to let it breathe and release part 2 in a few days. So make sure you're following the podcast so you don't miss it. And whether you've been part of the Baker story yourself, or you just love hearing the personal stories behind how one of the most successful roofing contractors in the nation was built, part 2 is going to be worth the wait. And we'll look forward to seeing you back here very soon.
That wraps up this episode of Under the Roof. Thanks for joining us and being part of the Baker Roofing family.
If you liked what you heard, share it with your crew. Hit the follow button and keep the conversation going wherever you work.
We're here to keep you informed, inspired, and included, because the more connected we are, the better we work together.
And as always, we'll leave you with this. We shall do good work, at a profit if we can, at a loss if we must, but always good work. See you next time.